So Mike is an associate professor with Oregon State University Extension 4-H Youth Development Program. He has 20 years of experience as a county 4-H educator and is known for his work in youth leadership, summer camps, after-school outreach programs, and volunteer development. And he, this bio I'm reading is for our presentation on Friday, which may mean something to you all and may not, but he's a master 4-H shooting sports instructor with certification in archery, shotgun, pistol, and Western heritage. So if you have any questions about the 4-H shooting sports program, Mike would be a really good contact. Mike also provides leadership on the professional development subcommittee for program leaders working group for the National 4-H Thriving Model. And that's why Mike and I are presenting, because we are co-leaders on that group with some other folks. Again, my name is Anissa Jepson. I work with Kansas State Research and Extension as a youth development specialist, and I provide statewide leadership for ag and natural resources and STEM programming. And that does include the shooting sports program and the military liaison program. So I've been involved in youth development organizations for over the last 15 years. And like I said, Mike and I are both on the program leaders working group for the Thriving Model. So with that, we'll kind of go into our presentation.
Thank you, Anissa. And I'm happy to be here via Zoom, and nice to see so many people present in this virtual audience that we have. And so the 4-H Thriving Model, of course, is our focus for today. And Anissa, were you, I think you're talking about our objectives.
Yeah, so we kind of went off. I didn't realize I was giving an introduction of us, so kind of missed our first slide. So our objectives today, we're going to talk about an overview of the Thriving Model. We're going to share some best practices that help us put that thriving theory in action. And then we're going to talk about how that Thriving Model can really improve the work that we're already doing in our military 4-H programming. And I don't know, I noticed that we have some links to the already recorded versions of presentations. And I think that if you haven't already checked out Justin Crow's presentation on essential elements, I think that's a good one to make sure you check out. That kind of goes in partnership with our Thriving Model. So just make sure to take advantage of some of that recorded presentations. So next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about 4-H as a developmental context. And it's important to remember that 4-H programs that are done really well can help you thrive by providing a place for them to explore their interests or passions or their sparks. And so offering this programming that follows the youth program quality principles by focusing on the youth belonging and emphasizing developmental relationships with adults who care will help challenge that growth and share the power. And so we're going to actually take a few minutes to look at this developmental context a little more closely. So next slide, please. Okay, so we hear a lot about sparks. So in previous presentations, if you check out Search Institute, things like that, we talk a lot about youth spark. And sparks are different from leisure activities for three very important things. They create action that contribute to the benefit of youth, but also to society. So a spark also provides that intrinsic fuel for a youth to gain knowledge and skill. And then it enhances networks, and not just within youth to youth, but youth to adult. So youth are able to find other youth that have that same spark, or they might be able to find and engage with adults who can help facilitate their learning and give opportunities for engagement in that spark. And that's why it's so important that we understand spark and know why it means so much in youth development. So next slide. So then when we talk about youth program quality standards, it's really important, again, to think through what things we need to have in place to make sure that we have a quality program. And I know that we have all of these checkpoints and we have all of these guidelines in place whether they're coming from the extension side of things or they're coming from the military side of things. But I think it's really important that when you are looking at quality standards that you dig a little deeper than just checking that box. So because they are so important as we look at the overall growth and development of youth. So this is just a basic guideline of what the thriving model talks about when we talk about program quality standards. And we highlighted 3 of them in the middle in green because you'll notice that that is, those are all terms that we're familiar with when we talk about essential elements, when we talk about 4-H in general. This is nothing new. It just puts kind of a different framework around what we're doing in 4-H. I think it's important that we make sure that youth have safety, whether, you know, in this new kind of era of COVID, that we're looking at not just physical safety, but psychological safety, virtual safety, things like that, that there's appropriate structure, that we have supportive relationships, and look at how different how we're creating these relationships have changed in the last 6 weeks to 2 months. Like, how are we going to create these supportive relationships with our youth? That we always are showing positive norms. Must be time for me to move to the next slide.
Sorry, Anissa, my cursor got in the way. It automatically advanced.
That's Mike's very subtle way of saying, okay, go on. No, just kidding. So, and then important to definitely remember that we have to always provide opportunities to belong, that we need to support for efficacy and mattering, that youth have to have the opportunity to have skill building, and then that there's the integration of all these things come together. And that's how we know we have a high quality program. So now you can move me forward. And then developmental relationships. I think this is so important because a positive supportive relationship between the youth and those adult mentors, whether they're 4-H staff, whether it's military staff, whether it's volunteers, I think it's so critical to what we do in youth development. These relationships are called developmental because they grow and change as the youth grows and changes. So the same relationship you had with that youth as an 8-year-old is going to look very different as a 15-year-old. Those relationships and the needs of the youth for relationships definitely changes throughout the course of their life. I think as adults, this is where that real challenge occurs, especially if we're involved in the youth life kind of moving forward, is how we can grow and change and expand our relationship. I think of sharing power, that definitely when we give youth voice and choice and how that looks and how that's so messy sometimes. And I think that's the hardest thing, but that's one of the really important things when you look at developmental relationships, that it's sometimes messy, but it all comes back down to the core.
And Anissa, I would say also that when you look at the developmental relationships, which is research has shown like one of the most important things. So your staff and volunteers, they need to know this. I would also say that most of our staff and volunteers intuitively are doing this. But if we want to raise the bar on the quality of our programming, we should move beyond intuitive and be intentional. And the nice thing is, I've done this with camp counselors and 4-H club leaders and after-school staff. You can begin just by looking at these points and having them share, you know, how have you been able to express care, challenge growth? And, you know, when they're sharing from their experience, they're buying in and basically reinforcing the fact that, yeah, we got this. But it is something that has to be a part of your programming, your culture. And the only way to do that is to make sure that on a regular basis, you know, you're working on reinforcing, encouraging, and putting these concepts into practice.
I agree. I love that. Move beyond intuitive and be intentional. Because I think we all know we're in youth development because we love working with youth and we love what we're doing. And so like moving on to that intentional and intentionality is so important. So you
And
might have made a quote. You might have made my favorite quote for the day, Mike. Just saying.
Well, and I like what Anissa just said. We do this because we love working with youth. And so that, and I like that because when I'm not big into like, oh, here's this graphic model of this thing we call the thriving model, and it's not the entire thing represented in this graphic. But no, this does not, the layout and the structure, this kind of thing doesn't excite me that much. But we do have to have some sort of framework to hang on these concepts. And so anyway, what Anissa just covered was the developmental context, which is the foundation for quality youth development programs. And I would say that all youth programs focus on the development of abs. And I don't mean like abs like in sit-ups and things like that, but on attitudes, behaviors, and skills. And if you think, well, we don't really work on attitudes, well, you're allowing attitudes to happen. So you're either intentionally working on positive attitudes, or you're allowing whatever attitudes that are in the youth to continue to develop. So no matter what your youth program, attitudes, behaviors, and skills are going to be encouraged and reinforced in one way or the other. And through the thriving model, you can have an intentional approach so that the attitudes, behaviors, and skills help promote the growth and development and success of that young person. And so if you look at this graphic, you know, you have your foundation of a developmental context, a quality program. They also have these things called thriving indicators. And that's what's moving out. And this is not sequential because all those thriving indicators youth have to some level, you know, and they're experiencing and working with or displaying these types of attributes. I would say that they're indicators that a youth is thriving. And it also are things that through your work with the youth, you should be encouraging the growth in each one of these thriving indicators. And so moving out and looking at those, being open to challenge and discovery. And this one pairs really nicely with growth mindset. So when you're working with youth and you're offering them activities where they're building their skills, whether it's arts and crafts or archery, or whatever the activity you have with youth, you need to keep in mind that from a growth mindset, youth need to know that we don't expect them to be experts or really good at something they haven't tried before. They need to be safe to try new things and not a threat to them. They need to understand that something new is something to be excited about, to give it a try and develop their skills. And we can encourage that when we focus on their development and their growth, as opposed to, you know, I mean, you're going to have your kids that are out there that are going to ace it the first time around. But make sure that the kids that have to work hard at it, that you really reinforce, you know, how much effort. So more focus on the effort that they expend towards their growth and development. And some of my other notes I want to make sure I don't miss out on is you want to be positive and encouraging youth to try new things. Importance of a growth mindset. And another phrase that your staff and volunteers should be aware of is not yet. So they're positively trying to accomplish a goal or a skill, and they should be comfortable to say, I'm working on it, but I just don't have it yet, not yet. And the other important aspect is that usually what holds a lot of youth back is the fear of what others are going to think or judge them as they're trying to develop a new skill. And some people catch on. Some kids are much quicker at it than others. And so they're worried about how they measure up among their peers. And so having an environment where youth are encouraged to be positive and encourage one another is the supportive environment that you need in order to have a kind of a safe climate for young people to try new things. hopeful purpose. And you know, a lot could be said on this topic in today's current climate and atmosphere. It's like, are things ever going to get better? Youth need to have a hopeful purpose, and ones youth that are thriving, they show that they're a hopeful purpose. And Spark has a lot to do with that. When a young person knows that, you know, this is something I'm really good at, I want to pursue more of it, whether it's pursue more of it because they enjoy it or pursue it because they see it in their career path. Either way, Sparks are kind of the source of inward motivation for young people and help promote that hope for the future. And so, you know, having done after-school programs, sometimes, you know, these are the activities we have because we can afford them. These are the activities we have because those are the staff that can deliver those activities. And so, you know, you have a wide variety of why you have these activities for kids. But just keep in mind that you still want to use them as best you can in this lens of the thriving model, so the kids are actually getting more out of it than just how to complete a nice art project. You know, that they're being encouraged. I mean, even if art is not their thing, which I have to relate to that, art is not my thing, you still want to encourage them in, you know, hey, you're working hard at that drawing, you know, that looks better than the stick figure that you started with, you know. So thriving or Spark is important, and developing of those skills. And the other thing that brings out hopeful purpose is that somewhere your program, when you work with youth, it needs to have youth empowerment and youth voice built into the structure of your program. So it's not just, you know, we dictate everything that kids are going to do from the time they arrive to the time that they leave. There should be opportunities where kids have to step up in leadership and step up in service to others. So, and then make sure that you do identify and recognize young people for their talents and how they're making your program or your community better as a result. And I like what, yeah, process is important. It's the process. Pro-social orientation. And what we're talking about there is, you know, basically it's how your young people interact with one another, how they interface with the adults and their peers. And obviously the values of respect, responsibility, honesty, kindness, generosity are all crucial to that. And you know, I say those things, and who doesn't want to see that with all the youth that they work with? Well, we need to make sure that we're intentional about encouraging those values, lifting up those values. And, you know, I've seen this work within our camp community with the summer camp and the camp counselors. And the wonderful thing about it is when you're doing kind of these pro-social norms, they start reinforcing and policing themselves, so to speak. Like, hey, you know, here at Wild West Camp, that's not cool. We have counselors that have that kind of line they throw out there when somebody has stepped across the line. Anyway, other things that you're looking at is clear pro-social behavior. I mentioned earlier that, you know, every youth program, you know, is either, well, they're all working on focusing on behaviors. It's just whether or not you're encouraging the right behaviors and are successful at that. And also having young people, I mean, I think we all have activities where we work with youth that if it's more leadership oriented or older teens, that they actually have a part to play in developing how we communicate to the larger group about the behavior expectations that we have. And we've seen that at like 4-H summer conference where the teen leaders come out and they talk about the code of conduct. Nationally, I saw the video, I don't know if I think it was Georgia, what state, that actually had a rap song where the kids presented the code of conduct in a very creative way. That's empowering youth. And for some of them, they were obviously talented too, so they got to display their talent. help youth practice generosity. So within our programs, how can they serve others? So we encourage that. You know, they may have completed their project because they're really good at, say, programming, and they can also serve as a helper to other youth, especially those that need more help, that might be struggling with learning those skills. Okay, you know, through transcendent awareness, and when I first saw this in the model, and then I even read about it, I'm like, wow, that sounds kind of heavy and complicated, and I don't even know how that, you know, how to wrap my head around that. But really, if you look at like what we have on the slide there, it's for young people to realize that and be aware of the reality that's bigger than themselves. And I think we all start out in human development to be survivalist. I mean, I think we always are, but at the heart of that is being selfish and only looking at the world from your perspective. I have raised 4 kids, and I used to say something like, hey, Captain Me Planet, you know, trying to communicate with them when they were focusing their world all about them, and help them understand that they have an opportunity and a responsibility, not just to themselves, but to others. And I think 4-H is good at this in the sense that whether it's a smaller community, like a 4-H camp community, they understand that, you know, I have to behave in a certain way because I'm not just representing myself, I'm representing 4-H, I'm representing the Wild West camp. And youth that are involved in 4-H leadership programs, they take that responsibility as well, that they're serving under the auspice of 4-H, and there's a code of conduct, there's an expectation of leadership. And so 4-H, and from a club, from a program, we are reinforcing that they're part of something larger. They're connecting with a larger community. And in that, they have opportunities to serve others. And another important piece that's in here, that an experience that young people have, is a sense of awe. You know, that, and nature oftentimes does that. In my background, I tried to pick something that was like unique to Oregon, and there's Crater Lake. It's one of the places besides the Pacific Ocean where I gain a sense of awe, but quite frankly, nothing has like awed me more than when I visited the Grand Canyon. But anyway, I love to hike, and so I love being out in nature and seeing that. But that's also should help people realize, young people and adults too, that just how large, you know, the world is. And I think that the other thing that I've already referred to was, you know, ethics, thinking of young people, the rules, you know, why they do the things they do. There was a one of our camp trainings, I had a counselor that stood up, and he was going to make a point, and my camp name is Ranger. And so he said, "We'll always remember what Ranger said." And at that point he had my attention, because I'm like, I wonder what I said. I hope it was good. You know, and he goes, no matter what, and he's talking to camp counselors, he goes, no matter, before you do something, you need to ask yourself, can we be sued for this? And obviously he was taking a quote from a risk management that I was covering with camp counselors maybe a few years back. And he was reminding all his peers that, you know, when you think about the activities that you might be doing with your campers, or even with one another during a training weekend, and thinking the responsibility is not just to yourself, but to the larger group.
Well, and I think especially in this situation, our military youth definitely have a larger groups that they're responsible for. Not only 4-H as a national organization, which I think helps like have that awareness that we're part of something bigger, but then also part of the military community. So the things that they do always reflects upon their family and their family member that maybe serves. And so I think it's really important, this part. And you're right, at the beginning I was like, oh, this does seem like a little too like heavy and out there, but really it is. It's that meaning and purpose in a bigger spot. So I think this is cool that we even talk about this.
And 4-H members or youth thrive through positive emotionality, and this is very important for brain development, but it's also important. Well, here's the, if you've anybody have read on emotional intelligence, Daniel Goleman is like the New York Times best author, you know, most sold books, several books he has out. Anyway, emotional intelligence really ties into this part of the thriving model. And one, it's that young people, you know, as we work with young people, we need to recognize that their emotions or their feelings matter. And sometimes we're very task oriented, or maybe some of us adults are very task oriented. We're going to get through this schedule. And we still need to be mindful that when a young person is having something is troubling them, and it might be something from within and not, you know, from your programming, that them having an opportunity to have their feelings validated is an important part of their growth and development. And it's something that your staff need to be aware of, and hopefully that you have enough staff, because, you know, obviously if there's somebody has to help that young person while the rest of the program continues. And that has to be with having intentional structure in your program, because you know everybody's going to have a bad day, and they may not be ready to move through everything that you've scheduled for the young people. And it's important that when you're creating the structure and the safe environment for the young people in your program, that they know that that is okay, that there's some way in which they can have an opportunity, if they feel safe, to talk to someone and express what they're going through. And that's providing youth development, even though it may not be a part of the actual activities we have planned, like, oh, but they're not going to get a chance to finish their project. Well, for that child in their life at that time, this might be the most important thing and the best thing we can do for that young person. And the other thing comes out, and this is also in the realm where we have young people who don't know how to manage their emotions and their feelings, and they have outbursts and create problems that can, you know, hey, we do not want one person's inability to control their emotions to ruin the experience for everyone else. So helping them understand the expectations that you have, how we can help them help themselves in managing their emotions and keeping them under control. And that is crucial for anyone to experience success in life, is to be able to effectively manage their emotions. And young people need to be coached, especially those that might struggle in this area. Thriving youth set goals and they persevere. They make self-regulatory decisions to make, you know, to be able to achieve this short-term and long-term success. And I think 4-H, if you look at the, you know, how often do we engage our young people to set goals? And if we don't, why not? In our programming, like I know that like with after school programming, we might have a free choice approach where kids go, I'm going to go to this activity, I'm going to go to that activity. And they may choose to, oh, no, I don't want that activity because maybe the challenge was too much for them. And they want to jump out and go to something else. I think it's important to challenge young people in this framework of self-regulation and goal setting that, hey, we expect you to take on challenges and to push through. The term that's used by researcher Angela Duckworth from is a grit, and it's a passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. And she's written that's another author of a great best-selling book. And anyway, to reinforce with the young people that this is a value that you have within your program. And I would say you could pick any one of these pieces of the thriving model and use it as something that you are encouraging not just your staff, but the young people in your program as well.
Okay, so Mike went over all of the components of the thriving trajectory. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we drive the thrive, which this is really how the youth engagement can affect the thriving trajectory. So we know that the more engagement that youth have, the more that we can drive that, or we can drive that thriving trajectory. So next slide, Mike, sorry, I guess you got a drink, but we're gonna talk a little bit about that. And the one way that we can really encourage the thriving trajectory is by doing more than participation. So participation alone does not lead to developmental outcomes. We know that from research that we've seen from other places, but that youth should participate actively and regularly in a positive youth development program. And 4-H has the greatest impact when youth are fully engaged. So Mike and I spent a lot of time yesterday talking about this topic because I think the biggest concern within the military community, or the things that I've seen in the installations I've worked at, and I also am a military mom, were how we could get the duration, the intensity, and the breadth in programming when our lives with youth and as military families don't always necessarily have that. And so I think this is one of the significant challenges we have within the 4-H program in general, and how we do that in military installations. So I don't know if anyone else has any other questions. Oh, did anyone catch the name of the last author? Was that Angela Duckworth? Was it The Grit? Yeah. Angela Duckworth. Her book about grit is really good. So yeah. So maybe if people want to add stuff to the chat about some of the things that they've seen, some issues that they've seen with maybe the duration, intensity, and breadth, and how those challenges are affecting military programming when it comes to 4-H.
Anissa, I would say that one way that I've seen this happen, and it just kind of happened organically through 4-H program, but we have an after-school program. Well, we sent flyers home with those kids about our summer camp program. And so we have a good number of those after-school kids that end up going to summer camp. And then and the duration or the intensity, some of them go back every year, and then they eventually join the camp leadership program and become counselors in training and camp counselors. And I've thought about that, because sometimes I worry about well, how much do we really provide in our after school program, because sometimes the kids are in and out, and you just wonder, it doesn't seem as cohesive as maybe say a 4-H club or at camp even, where you got the kids for 24/7, well 24/5 or whatever. But I have definitely seen over the years that camp is a powerful program, even though those kids, we only get to have them for that time, for that week. And yet we see tremendous amount of growth. We see them have that sense of community, developmental relationships that occur. And, so anyway, sometimes maybe our programs where we feel like there's a lot of limitations, but they still have opportunities maybe to jump into another, 4-H streams or program. And then that increases their intensity and their breadth and the duration of involvement in 4-H. So don't forget about those opportunities they have, to do more in 4-H, attend the 4-H, I don't know if you have we have a summer conference for teens, that can be open for any of the teens that you work with across your 4-H programming. And, they may not know anything about it because maybe club kids know more, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't enjoy being a part and growing through that experience.
So Laura commented about the turnover of staff and how that impacts the local program. So we also talked about this, and Mike was like, because I was like, well, here's the deal. Sometimes you'll have youth that don't come back, or sometimes you'll have for reasons they can't control, and then a lot of times you'll have staff turnover. We have some installations that have a lot of staff turnover, some that don't. And Mike was like, that's where structure within your program becomes so important, because then it doesn't necessarily matter, you know, who the staff is in creating those long-term experiences, because the staff, it's not personality driven as much as it is programmatically driven. And so that was one thing to make sure that we're really trying to encourage that youth development, because I agree, like staff turnover becomes something very important. The other thing to think about when you think about like intensity and how often the program happens, I think that it's important that it's always fun, like that we're doing things that are fun and that the youth are having that voice and choice so they come back. Let's see, competition for their time. Yeah, that's huge. And that's a problem in not just military 4-H programming, but 4-H programming all over the place, because kids are so structured in what they do. I think that one of those positive things that might have come out from this COVID-19 kind of thing that happened is that parents might find that their kids don't need to be as structured in running from one activity to another. Maybe there will be a shift in how that happens. So that's kind of what we were looking at when we were thinking about the duration, intensity, and breadth. It's not something that we can necessarily control so easily. We're going to have to think through ways to do that. We do have a question. How would you encourage relationships right now as social distancing is required component of 4-H programming? And I think that the one thing that we're trying to do is all of these other virtual experiences. So again, the same things that we're doing with our adult professionals, we're trying to do with youth. We're trying to think of different ways that we can connect with youth virtually. I know that in Kansas right now, we're going to kind of have another shift in how we're connecting with youth, because the technology that they were getting to borrow from schools is getting taken away because it's summer break. So we're going to have to rethink again, like all those kids that maybe didn't have access to internet or didn't have access to technology, how can we reach those youth as well? So next slide. Oh, let me see.
Oh, I was going to also, I think you talked about the staff that don't hang around very long. Mm-hmm. That also, if you look at why we do what we do, is because we believe that the work we're involved in is making a positive difference in the lives of young people. And I've certainly seen, we provide training to our teen counselors every year, and they actually get to the very first training. We provide the thriving, we do a thriving evaluation of camp. Now, how are we doing when you look at these components of the thriving model? And Dr. Mary Arnold has a tool on the website that you can use to evaluate your programming with as well. It's general enough, it's looking at these concepts we're covering. And so I report that back to our camp counselors, because they're largely the reason we're either hitting the mark or not. And we'll score really high on the 5-point or 6-point scale, but still the counselors will look out there and they'll see, what? Why is it only 85% of the kids are comfortable talking to their, staff person or counselor, and they're ready to find out who's falling down, but the number is, fairly high, and it's above the state average. But because, they're familiar with the concepts of the thriving model, and they know this is what we need to do to help young people thrive, I think what that does is it increases their motivation to continue to be a part of the program. And our teen counselors don't get paid, so they have to willingly want to volunteer every summer to do this for 1 or 2 weeks. I only have 2 weeks of camp. So anyway, and I think that looking at after school staff, helping them realize the big picture and that they're a part of helping young people thrive could help them want to continue beyond, 1 year or whatever your turnaround is in staff.
So Brent just mention that the Navy, one of the reasons that the Navy does require 4-H across all of their youth centers is to help have that program go anywhere in the Navy. And I agree, like there is 4-H in every installation. And I think as 4-H professionals, we need to make sure that those opportunities are across the board a little more alike. I know that even if you go into Kansas or Iowa, those are the two organizations I've worked with, it looks different within the county. So when you go state to state, it looks very different. So I think that's one of our challenges as extension professionals, is to try to make 4-H seem similar. It can't be the same, but seem similar so that youth do have that opportunity to have that duration, intensity, and breadth, no matter where their parents or caregivers are stationed. So, okay, we better get going. Next slide, because we are behind. We are both talkers, in case you guys haven't noticed that. So we're gonna kick it up and get through these things, maybe.
So as I first began learning about the thriving model, this picture came to mind, or this experience, as chaperoning Oregon delegates to the National 4-H Congress. And we got to visit the World of Coke. And here we are outside of the safe has a secret recipe for Coca-Cola. And, anyway, it made me think about, even though I have nearly 20 years of youth development experience with 4-H, that I'm like, the thriving model is like the secret recipe has been revealed, and we don't have to guess what the ingredients are anymore. We can be intentional at making sure that we're putting all the right ingredients into our program. And so this jumps here into the thriving, developmental outcomes. You look right down here, and if you're really familiar with the 5 C's, which I use that a lot, particularly before the thriving model, because who doesn't want their young person to develop competence, confidence, connection, and caring, and but here's where the short came. The short where it fell short was researchers had a tough time pinpointing how do you detect that somebody grew in confidence, except that it falls in one of these domains. And so these developmental outcomes are easier to detect that growth in the 5 C's. And so that's why the thriving model incorporates that. And you can certainly say it correlates with the 5 C's. And I'll just share one story that I have. A young person who was involved in our robotics team, and that was like the Lego robotics. And when he first started out, he helped us develop our robotics program because he did not have pro-social skills. When we were doing the team event where the kids are supposed to be doing something together, a team challenge, and it was that case, they had to put all these objects in a long tube, not all of them, but pick the objects they want in the tube. The tube was going to be, they're going to shake the tube and you shouldn't hear anything. So there were soft objects and hard objects. Well, because he liked to be difficult, he was trying to pick nuts and bolts and things that were going to clank and make noise. And the coach, which was me, can't say anything. And I'm sweating, thinking, why did we let him get on this team? So anyway, they did eventually work it out as a team without any violence or negativity towards that kid. But it did make us realize, you know what, in our robotics program, in order to get on the team, you must show the values and behaviors of a good teammate. And so the next year he was back in the program, and we didn't announce who the team members would be. I mean, we might announce as they went through the after a month or so, we'd start adding kids to the teams based on their, earning that right. And he was the last one. He did earn a spot on the team. It was questionable up to that point. And what's really cool about Dylan is that he went from a kid that was your most challenging kid to work with in your after-school program to going to camp. And even when he went to camp, he wasn't that great. And I was like, oh, now he's in the camp program. And eventually he became a counselor in training. I thought, really? But he ended up being a wonderful camp counselor that he matured and developed and had social competence and personal standards and contributed to others. Basically, you look at these developmental outcomes, And even though, I mean, you have kids that fly to this level and it seems like they don't do anything wrong, but we also have kids that need a lot of help along the way. And Dylan was one of those. And he definitely experiencing thriving, but our program had to be intentional in helping him get there.
Mike, can you go over what the 5 C's were again?
Oh, that was from learners from Tufts University study.
Mm-hmm.
And
yep.
I haven't used the 5 C's, so I think I only got 4 of them, right? Confidence, competence, caring, connection, contribution, I think.
Contribution.
Yeah. Was that a 6th C though, wasn't it?
Yeah. So we've had much discussion about the 6th C. And so then now I'm like, oh, we'll look that up. And contribution was the 6th. Character. Huh,
oh yeah, character.
Thanks, Kate. Of course, Casey knew that. We knew we could count on Casey to pull that one out.
But you can see the 5 C's in here with personal standards would be character. Mm-hmm. Competence is social competence was how they were measuring, competence. And I would also say academic success would be confidence as well as competence. Thank you, Casey, for helping us out.
It's always good until someone asks a question, then I'm like, it all just like goes out of my brain so quickly. So the one thing I will say that people have been kind of chatting about is Pam mentioned that she's really encouraged that our pivot to virtual opportunities will mean new and useful methods of carrying 4-H out to geographically dispersed military youth. And I think you agree. And I mean, I agree, because I also think not only will it let us reach out to those geographically dispersed youth, but it will help us create more continuity within the 4-H program as those youth move from installation to installation. And so I think that there's some definite positives that will come out of this. I also think that it has really forced our organizations, both military and extension, to really think in new ways, which I mean, working for a university, it's definitely a little slower movement. And so this really made us kind of, all the things we talked about in kind of these abstract things that we wanted to do to make our program better, all of a sudden we're like, we better do them because somebody else is going to do them. And so I think it was a help. Okay, next slide. So the youth thriving model is that you thrive because of the participation in 4-H, and they achieve those developmental outcomes that Mike talked about and I talked about. And I think that this is the part that really tied it in for me. I am a 4-H'er. I'm a 4-H mom. I, can say the 4-H pledge. I can say that usually at the drop of a hat. But it was really good for me to tie the 4-H pledge into what Dr. Arnold had really realized were our long-term outcomes. So our head was the academic and vocational success. And I think it's really important that we added the vocational success, because not every youth is going to go to a 4-year college. They might go to a 2-year college. They might enter the workforce. And I think we have to really start to think about things that way, and that success looks different for everyone. And there's the heart, the contribution to others through civic engagement. It's really important that we give back. We talk about that all the time, but then really being, again, intentional in what we do will show that contribution. Our hands, oh, sorry, yeah, Brent, yes, our head could be military service. That is true also. Sorry, I didn't include that, but that is true. Hands, it's that employability and economic stability. And I think that is another one that we really have to think about, how we're going to equip our young people to be really resilient, have that grit, and be able to do the things that they're going to need to do moving forward. And then, of course, health. We want them to be happy. Isn't that what we all want for all the youth that we work for our own youth, for whatever that we do, is that they are happy and that they feel good about what they're doing and what they've accomplished. So next slide.
So if I could say one thing about happiness, and that is that thriving youth can be still thriving and not necessarily happy momentarily, because we all face challenges, whether it's family life issues, school issues, relationships. they have to navigate the troubles of life. And so they may not say that they're happy at the moment, but they can still be thriving youth because they have the tools to navigate through the challenges, and they'll be happy again, so to speak, when they get on the other side of the challenges. So the most important thing is that they have the skills and they are thriving and will make it through. It's I just wanted to make sure it's in the literature. We want to make sure that, oh, well, they're not thriving because they're not happy. We all know as a parent that there are things that we do with our kids that don't make them happy, but it's important for them in their growth and development.
And then here is the entire model. And I will say that, so when we talked about the 5 C's and that 6th C, we are working, because a lot of the, especially a lot of you that have worked in youth development know that some of this information seems very familiar as far as with the Search Institute. So we were really excited. I will say this, oh,
sorry.
Which one of us, whose dog is that? It's Mike's. I will say that as a youth development professional, I was super excited because we were going to get to go to the Search Institute. And for me, that has kind of always been like a dream. And then COVID hit, and we met with them virtually, which was still exciting to talk about the research, but I had kind of hoped that we would get to like go and pick the minds of those that work at the Search Institute. But so just know that we will be working in partnership with them with their research and the things that we brought to the table and what Dr. Arnold had been looking at. So here's the full thriving model from the beginning to the end that we talked about. I just wondered, we kind of have had questions, we've kind of discussed some of them, but does anyone else have any questions that they would like to ask us before we kind of end everything? Because I kind of rushed us through and then we ended in a good spot. And this is Dr. Arnold, and this is the research references that we used for this presentation. She also has a website and blog that you can access the research she's been working on, which is really great. Within the next year or so, our professional development committee, I think by the end of the year is our deadline for having some additional professional development for extension professionals to work on the thriving model. We're working with a group from the entire United States, some extension professionals that have worked on that and some other youth development professionals. So does anyone else have any questions?
Anissa, I would direct anyone that wants, like pretty much the information we shared today, like most of it, you will find on the Thriving Model website, which is that at Oregon State Thriving Model. You'll find tip sheets on each piece of the Thriving Model that we moved through today. And I would just encourage you to go there, download those, and be familiar with those and how you can start incorporating those into the programming that you do, training staff and volunteers, encouraging those concepts with the young people that you work with, and basically create a thriving community within your youth programs that even young people can look and understand what growth mindset is, that they know what it means to have grit. Those concepts, and I realize that some of us have audiences that may only be there for a few months, but with intention and with structure, you can build that into your programming as best as possible to reinforce and provide that.
And I think it's important too that we really look at the thriving model from not something new, but something that we've been doing as youth development professionals. And so I think that's an important kind of key when you're thinking about this and looking at the work that you do. Pamela says, thanks. A happy youth can also be thriving, you're right. I think we're really, I think we're really having to kind of deal with those things, that there are people that are youth that are unhappy right now, but yet they might still be thriving, and how can we help overcome and find new ways for them to continue within their community. Because we know, the group that I work with, I'm not necessarily an extrovert, but I'm not really an introvert, but I want the choice to be an introvert or an extrovert. And so I think that how we navigate these hard times is really kind of important when we look at how you thrive. Okay, there is a template online on planning the Thrive model, I believe. Yeah, so there's things that are up on the website. National 4-H has some things, Oregon State has some things, there's gonna be more things coming up. So as we move forward in the year, there definitely will be more information. So seeing that there's no other questions, I want you all to kind of stay on, because I know that there are 2 polling questions that are coming up somewhere. Ah, there we go. I'm like, I know, okay, I remember. I'm trying to think back, Jenny, to what my instructions were. There are 2 polling questions that are coming up somewhere, and then there's gonna be 1 more question that is coming up in the chat that you will need to answer. So if you were on the session earlier today, it's the same process. So definitely the 2 polling questions and then the chat questions. And so then, of course, you know, as my role as facilitator, I just want to take the time to thank Mike and myself for doing a wonderful job. I think we did great. I'm just kidding, sorry. But thank you all for hanging in with us for the last hour. It's been really fun to learn more about the Thriving model as I've worked with this group from the West Coast. It's been a challenge to try to figure out my time zones, but I've done it. So thank you all. And I think our next session is going to be super fun. Yes, because it's the youth. So definitely be on that next session, and thank you all.